First and foremost, I just always like to say happy Thursday. I hope you're all having a wonderful week. And thank you for taking the next 45 minutes out of your very busy schedules to join me for this month's Accelerate Series webinar. Now, for this month of September, our focus on our webinar today is mining for opportunities by leveraging asset map features. So there may be some features that you think of in your mind when you're looking for opportunities. Those could be your go-to, but the fun thing is that there's actually several different features and functionality to help you uncover potential opportunities, and not only potentially uncover, but then actually test those hypotheses through math to determine, are people on track, yes or no? So that from mining for the opportunity all the way to presenting, you have a clean and concise way of doing so to be able to illustrate, we were looking at this, we found that this would be an issue, or we saw this pop up, but here's how together we're going to fix it. That's the purpose of our call today. Now, if this is your first time joining me for my Accelerate Series webinar, my name is LiaJean McHenry. I am our Senior Training Manager over here at Asset Map. And I've been leading this webinar series for, I want to say, almost the last 4.5 years, which is crazy. So, I've gotten to know a lot of you. I see familiar names on this training every single month. And some of you, I feel like I've known you for years at this point. So thank you for your dedication. Thank you for being here. For those that I have not had the pleasure of meeting yet, one thing you should know about me is I'm incredibly passionate about our product because I really believe that Asset Map can help launch your business to the next level. And to be truthful, I really believe that Asset Map helps you help your clients, which for me, this is what this is all about. You have a unique opportunity to help people achieve financial wellness. And it's all I could ever want for anyone in this world, because financial health is wealth, just like your physical health is wealth as well. It's also important. So thank you for what you do. Thank you for being here. Thank you for investing in a product that I know will not only do great things for your business, but continue to do great things for you over the years with your clients. So with that being said, if you've never joined me previously, I host this Accelerate Series webinar every single month. It's usually the third Thursday or the fourth Thursday at 3. It just depends. If we have holidays or 5 Thursdays in a month, sometimes we'll push it to the fourth. It just really depends on scheduling. That being said, every month you can count on me joining in and teaching you about some different features and functionality in the platform. If you like today's session and you want to see some past ones I've done, trust me, I have all of them available. They're tucked away in a nice, clean place in app where you can find them and you can watch the recordings. And then next thing you know, we're going to be best friends because you're going to have listened to me for hours and hours. So are these recorded? Yes. Will you get the recording? Yes. If you're an enterprise client, sometimes we have to submit the recording through approval. So just know that if you don't get an email with the replay, just know that you can ask for it in the coming week or so, and we'll get it over to you. But pretty much everyone on this call will get an email afterwards with the replay. So let's talk about what kinds of things we're going to be covering today in terms of mining for opportunities by leveraging these Asset Map features. We're going to talk about mining your household index list. This is probably one of the most fun areas for me to train on because I don't get to do it very often. And I think it's a really underrated area of the application because I really think you can learn and gain a lot of insights in this particular section. So I'm going to teach you how to leverage your household index list through changing the columns, through applying filters, and you may not even know what I'm talking about. So buckle up. It's going to get exciting because I'm going to show you from start to finish. I'm going to show you how we can start in the household index list to potentially look for initial opportunities. Then I'm going to show you clicking into a household to dive into that opportunity further. This is where I find that the analysis tools tend to work best. So tools like Signals and tools like Target Maps. We'll talk about what each of them are, not necessarily the point and click of how they work, because we have other trainings on that, right? And everybody on today's calls on like a scale, or excuse me, there's a bit of a scale here in terms of how long people have been using the platform. So we like to make it applicable to everyone. So if after today you're like, you know what, I really need more training on Signals, or I need more training on Target Maps, we have them. Don't worry. And you can reach out to us. We actually offer weekly calls for our Signals Target Map sections. I don't have it on here, but I'm also going to take you through some interactive reports and things we have in households as well that you could use in your conversations to potentially gather additional assets and or uncover opportunities as well. We always talk about support and resources. So of course, all throughout and even at the end, I'll remind you where you can go when you have questions or if you need help. And if you have questions throughout, please just use the chat feature in Zoom. That's the best place to submit the questions to me. And if it's applicable to the group, I'll answer it on the call. If not, stick around at the end and I can stop the recording and can answer your questions if necessary. Okay, or you can reach out to the support options. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. What we're going to do is we're going to log into Asset Map. That's always the first step. And we're going to go right into our household index list. If you're not familiar, your household index list will be your full list of households that have been added into the application. Okay, so when you click into this list, any names that you see listed here means that you added them into the application, or perhaps some of you that are on either an enterprise or on a firm setup, there might be an opportunity where like some folks have shared households over to you, but that won't be applicable unless you're on an office or an enterprise setup. Okay. Either way, when you come into your household index list, this will show you your list of households that you added into the application. And there are some preset columns that you see along the top here. Now, a lot of these are just data entry insights for these different households and the data that have been added into the application. Let's go through just the few that are the defaults here. Owner means who added this household into the application. You can see that most of these are for myself. I do have an office set up, so there's a couple people that have shared a household over to me. Status is what's the household type. So when you go to manually add a household, you may or may not have noticed that you have to select a household type. Is it a client? Is it a prospect? Is it a sample? Is it a stencil? Okay. So that's what status means. Think of status as being synonymous with household type. Now, you can click into the households and change them, and I'll show you how to do that in just a moment. Last modified is probably one of my most favorite columns, if I'm just being fully transparent, because this will tell you the last time you clicked into that household and or modified some of their information. And while the household index list in terms of the names does default to go A to Z, if you click on any of the columns, it'll flip the sort and it'll go from Z to A. If I flip it again, it goes back to A to Z. Just like if I click owner, it's going to group the owners by their names and go alphabetically, or if I flip it back, it'll just go back to going in alphabetical order based off of the list that's been in here. Okay, so there's a couple different options. You can kind of play around with these different sections if that's important to you. Same thing with status. You can group the status. So if you click on the status column, it'll group all of your clients first. If you keep scrolling through, I have tons and tons of households in here, but you can see these are all clients. If I go to the next page, okay, again, it's going to be mainly clients for the first half, and then it switches into prospects, then it'll go into samples, then it'll go into stencils. Okay. Last modified though, and by the way, if you ever want to refresh this page to go back to the default, you can just refresh your browser. It'll reset the columns to just be exactly what you'll see when you typically will click in here. If you click last modified, if you're trying to look for a household that you just worked on, I tend to click the last modified column and I'll flip it. So it shows me, you know, the farthest away people I've modified first. But if I flip it again, it'll say, hey, you just worked on this household like 25 minutes ago. And then I can just click back in it. So like kind of a quick way to find someone you recently worked on. After that, you can hover over the sections if you don't know what the abbreviations mean. So we've had assets under management or accounts under management, wallet share, number of members, number of financials, and number of target maps. So these are the system default columns that are in your household index list. But here's the thing. We have an entire columns dropdown that you can pick and choose from. So while these are the ones that are defaulted on, you can see that they're pre-selected. Look at this list. And you might be saying, stop going so fast. We're not going to go through each of them. Okay, you can come in here and look at them yourself. But look at this list. It goes alphabetically. There are so many different columns that you can take a look at. Okay, maybe you want to isolate some folks by state. Maybe you want to isolate by like ratio debt. You want to isolate by net worth, whatever that is. You can come in here and you can change the columns that you see along the top. Now, Let me give you a use case example, okay? Maybe I'm looking for, an insurance opportunity. And I like to look at earned income amount against like insurance death benefit. So what I can do is I can scroll through this list and I can add the income earned column and I could add the insurance death benefit column. And you can see over on the right, it adds the columns here. Now, sometimes people will ask me, hey, LJ, I love the columns, but is there a way to put them in a particular order? There is, but it goes off of what you have selected in the columns, right? So if you wanted this to go in a particular order, you'd have to move the things around. So you could like uncheck some of these things like so, right? You could uncheck the ones just like this, because maybe what you want to go in order is you want it to be the name, you want the owner, you want income earned, insurance death benefit, excuse me. Then you might want last modified column. Then you might want wallet share. Okay. But as you can see, sometimes when you put some of these default ones back in, it pre-puts them in places. So you may have to play around with it and you may not always get to move the column exactly where you want it to be. But the nice thing is you can deselect and select the things of your choosing. Okay. Now let's talk about filters for a moment. And I'm just going to refresh because I want to start back on the default. Up at the top, you also have filters that you can apply. So the filters mirror the columns that you see in this columns drop-down list, but the difference is you can put parameters of what you're trying to filter. So look down here on the bottom left-hand side. I have 246 households added into Asset Map in my login, okay? So maybe I'm filtering for an opportunity and I want to isolate just the prospects by themselves. Okay. By the way, if you want to know what some of these columns are, like what is wallet share, etc., let me show you a helpful resource that you can find. If you just click the chat bubble here on the upper right-hand side, and I'm answering this now because the question came into the chat, you can come into the search for help section and you can type in, even just like key financial figures, for example, because a lot of the key financial figures that are found in individual households flow through to the columns that you see. So if you come to key financial figures, you can scroll down and it'll actually list off by definition what all these things are. And so like if you wanted to know what wallet share is, it'll tell you what it is, like right here. So key financial figures are specific to the individual households. They're a roll-up summary of like everyone in that household, but they also align with the different columns and filters. So like if you're wondering like, well, what is wallet share? It'll let you know. That looks at the 3 specific financial instruments: retirement asset instruments, non-retirement, and cash value of insurance instruments. The calculation is then combined monetary value of these instrument types under the management of the financial advisor divided by the total combined monetary value of these 3 instruments expressed as a percentage. So I'm just going to point that out. You can find that in the support center. Just type in key financial figures, okay, and click on the first option right here. Scroll down and it'll give you the full list and explanation of what those different definitions and things are if you want a little bit more insight. So hopefully that answers your question there, okay? Now, coming back into the household index list, if I want to apply a filter, I can go ahead and click filter. And from this dropdown, it'll be all the same columns that we saw a moment ago, but instead these now become filters. So I like to just smart search what I'm looking for up at the top rather than try to like scroll through this list. I don't personally like doing that. So what I like to do is I'll come in here and I'll say, okay, I want to look at income earned amount of any households that make more than, let's say, $200,000. Okay, so they make more than $200,000 of earned income amount. In addition, I want to look at the insurance death benefit. So if I start typing in death, I can do the insurance death benefit. And I could say, you know what, I want to see households that have less than, let's say, $1.5 million of insurance, right? So I can come in here and I could say, this is less than, right, $1.5 million. Okay, can add that in there and you can check to make sure that you've got $1.5 million in there. Yes, so the questions coming in again about the key financial figures, I'll exit out of it just to show the group. Click on the chat bubble. Come to the search bar, that'll be right here, search for help and type in key financial figures and pick the first one. Okay, and that'll show you what the columns explanations are. All right. Okay, back into the filter. All right. If anybody asks about key financial figures again, I'll show you at the end, but I want to make sure that we continue moving through the material. So if you come back into the filter section, and actually before I show you the insurance one, just as an example of what I'm going to do, one popular one I like to use is status. So remember, status is household type. So sometimes what I'll do is I'll say status is prospect, and I'll just click apply. And it'll take my 246 households and tell me that 58 of them are marked as a prospect. I like to keep things really clean and concise. So sometimes I'll do this, or I'll delegate it to somebody on my team. I'll have them come in and click into the household and change the status of the people that have come on board full-time as a client. Like, for example, let's say that the Benzo household, like, they're a full-time client now, they're not a prospect. Well, I want my household index list data to be correct. So I would click into the Benzo household, click edit next to the household name, and I could just mark that this is a client. And then I could scroll to the right and click save household, and that'll get updated. Okay, so I just want to show you here that this is where you can come in a household to change the household type, otherwise known as status. And again, in your household index list, the status column is a default one, but I always like to use the status filter when I'm trying to look at my prospects. Why? Because I might want to re-engage some of the prospects that have fallen off, right? Sometimes life happens and people fall off, and it doesn't mean that there aren't opportunities there. It gives us an opportunity to re-engage, right? We built a map for them. If they're in the application, let's come up with a re-engagement strategy, and we can go from there. Okay. So from there, we can go ahead and continue on. Now, you can also apply multiple filters at a time. You could say, you know what, I want to see any of my prospects that have, let's look at cash, right? So let's say that they have more than, let's say, greater than or equal to $100,000 sitting in cash. If I click apply filter, I go from 57 households down to 0, right? Because none of them match this filtering criteria. So this is where I have to come in and I can say, okay, I can play around with this number. I could say more than $50,000. I click apply filter, and it does, and it says, listen, you have one prospect that has more than $50,000 sitting in cash. So maybe I'll go into this household and I'll think about, is there a way for us to move some of that cash into this investment opportunity that I have, as an example. Okay. So even when the filters are applied, you can click into the filter and you could change it. And you could say, you know what, let me actually look at all of my clients and let me see any households that have more greater than or equal to $100,000 sitting in cash. I could come in here, switch it to client, click apply, and all of a sudden I go from now to 2, right? You have 2 households out of the 246 that you have that are marked as a client, and that they have greater than or equal to $100,000 sitting in a cash. Okay. And I can click in and I can go through that. Now, let's say that you find a filter set that you really like, right? Maybe my sweet spot is these 2 filters, for example. You can save these filters so that you can flip back to them at a later date, right? Because sometimes we play around with the columns and the filters and we find a selection that just works. But guess what? If you click off of this page and you go back into the household index list, it defaults back to the original view. So you're like, dang it, the columns that I reselected, the filters I applied, they're gone now. Yes, they're going to clear out every time unless you save them as a filter or column set so that you can flip back to them at a later date. Now, how do we do that? Well, let me show you the insurance one as a quick opportunity finder, right? And again, I'm just using this as a light example, but there's tons of columns and filters you can choose from. But let's say specifically that I'm looking for possible insurance opportunities, and I want to look at income earn amount next to insurance death benefits. So I'm going to add those 2 columns at the end. Then I might come and apply some filters, and I might say, you know what, I'm looking at income earned, but I want to look at households that are bringing in more than $200,000 of earned income. I also want to look that they have less than $1.5 million of insurance. So this is where I can come in and I could say less than 1.5 million. Okay. Then I can come in here and I can add in some other things. Like, you know what, I want to look at households that have liabilities that are, let's say, greater than or equal to $80,000, right? Like if you're bringing in decent income, you don't have a ton of insurance, but you also have liabilities and also maybe some dependents that are depending on you, well, then there could be insurance opportunities there, right? Or maybe there's other products or vehicles that you would recommend to fund, like a loss of life, right? It doesn't have to exclusively just be for insurance. But what we can do is I could say, let me look at any of the households that have at least, greater than or equal to one dependent. If I click apply, look at this. I go from 246 households down to 4. And I could look here and I could say, okay, here's these different households. I have the opportunity to take a look at what we've got listed here. And we can play around with these different numbers so that we can have those conversations. And actually, I need to just lower this by 1 0. There we go. I had this a little, nope, actually, I was right. I need to leave this up there like that. Can go ahead and click apply. And then you can play around with these filter sets so that you can take a look at them, right? And you can have that opportunity to have that discussion, and you can take a look at that there. Again, you can come in here and you can play around with the filters clicking in, but let's say that this is the filter set and this is the column set that we want to look into deeper. This is where I have the opportunity to click save on the upper right and actually save this as a household index layout. If I click save as, I could come in here and I could call this like underinsured insurance opportunity or something like that. And I could click save. And guess what it's going to do? It's going to save it up here on the upper left-hand side in my layouts drop down so that I can flip back to it at a later date. So watch this. If I go back to my home page, click back into my household index list, it defaults back to the original view. Okay, no filters applied or anything. But what I can do is I can click my layouts drop down and I can scroll down and I can look for that underinsured insurance opportunity, flip it back on, and it's going to go in and it's going to look at those here for us. Okay, and we can take a look at that moving forward. Now, for those of you that are on our elite level subscription, and for some of you that are our enterprise clients, you may not have this feature yet, but it might be something that's coming for you in the future. We also have up here at the top, if you have access, you'll see it. If you don't, it means it's not included in your subscription, or you might be an enterprise client of ours where this might be something that has to get approved or could be coming for you later down the road. But we do have signals within every single household. But some of you might have access to Signals Plus, which allows you to look at signals across all of your households. And it's a default layout. So there's the system default, which is just the typical household index list, the same preset columns. But some of you might also have the Signals Plus option, which will show you your signals across all of your households. Again, if you're an enterprise client, you may or may not have this. It'll be something that has to get approved through compliance or get approved for you all to have access to. But a lot of you on today's call will likely have access to this. So I wanted to at least point it out. And when you apply the signals layout, you can come into the columns area and you can play around with this too. So you could, again, you could isolate down and just say, you know what, I'm just looking at longevity, because longevity ties really well into the conversation of retirement, right? Are you going to outlive your money? And, are you going to be okay? We could isolate and just look at longevity, and then we could come in and we can add some additional columns in here if we're looking for some insights. Like we could look at, asset retirement amount. We could add that in. And we can add in, asset retirement count, and we can come in and we could look at, these different pieces. We can add those components in to potentially look for opportunities. Okay. Now I'm going to go ahead and show you, there's a couple other ones that I've kind of pre-created in here. Sometimes I'll create like a filter set for Henrys, right? High earners, not rich yet. So I added a filter that says, income earned greater than or equal to 300,000, but their overall net worth is less than $500,000, right? That's like a filter set that I've saved. Or I might want to look at, high wallet share for, if you kind of categorize your clients like A clients, B clients, C clients, right? You can come in here and set, I want the wallet share percentage to be greater than or equal to 50%. And that'll show you that there. Again, if you're not sure what some of these column selections mean, like you might say, well, like, what is this? What's being included in this number? Go to the key financial figures support document and take a look, because we have the explanations written out for you here. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and flip back into my underinsured opportunity. And I'm just going to adjust it a little bit and say, you know what, let me look at households that have like $50,000. And we'll call this 125. Okay, so we'll call this, if they're we'll call it like $1.2 million. You can adjust it however you see fit. Then what it's going to do is it's going to filter accordingly. And then you can take a look at this here. Okay. And I could come in here and I could say, you know, greater than or equal to. You can play around with these different things as you see fit. So let's say that I'm, you know, going through this list. I find a household where I think that there could be a problem where we might need to have a conversation, right? I can click into the household itself. I could take a look at their map. Sometimes looking at the map, it becomes pretty clear if like you're missing some information, right? And in this case, I probably am, because like I don't have anything listed for insurance. I don't have anything listed for these different sections. It looks like they may have selected if I sent them through discovery. But the thing is that whenever I find a potential opportunity in the household index list, I go straight into the household, because sometimes it appears that there could be an opportunity, but it's because we're just missing some information, right? Like in this perfect example, they said, you know, that they marked they had insurance, but we don't actually know their insurance information yet. So this would be a good, you know, point for me to reach out and finish and facilitate that conversation. Now, let's say that I have another household that came up in my household index list because I searched this one earlier, okay? This particular household populated for me that there could be a potential opportunity for some additional insurance. Let me just go ahead and clean this up really quick because I was testing it before this webinar, so I apologize for that. Okay, so let's go ahead and click here. All right, and let me just make sure that these are deleted. Yep, we're all good there. All right, so again, if I come back into my household index list, I flip back, scroll down to my underinsured opportunity, okay? Another option is going to populate here, and it was that household, that Eddie household, okay? So if I type in that household's name, like so, I can search it. I could even remove the filters if I want to, okay? You can play around with this as you see fit. There's really like no right or wrong way to do this, because either way, you have to click into the households themselves to dive in deeper. So if I click at this household, because listen, they're bringing in $245,000 of earned income, but they have less than $1.5 million of insurance, right? So I think that there's an opportunity here for us to dive into that deeper. If I click into that household and I look at their map, I can say, okay, you know, they've got some group life, looks like they've got some whole life policies, but guess where I'm going right after that? If I can verify that there is in fact, you know, some level of funding that could go towards a loss of life, for example, the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go straight to signals. Is this screening tool pointing something out to me that there really could potentially be a problem? And yes, sure enough, the signal showing is yellow. If you click into the signal, it'll tell you what the signal's based upon. It'll even give you some considerations to consider. Now, the one thing I want you to remember here is that Signals does have a predictive model built into the back end, but it's not designed to be a perfect solve. This is why we don't share the math behind it. Okay, we have a really great detailed support article on Signals that will go in a little bit more depth as to kind of what's being considered in terms of the calculation, but we're not going to tell you the straight lined math. We're not going to give you the algorithm, right? Why? Because it's not designed to be a perfect solve. Signals is a screening tool. What it does is it gives you permission to dive deeper. You say, listen, you know, we were doing our routine checks. We use and leverage this screening tool. When I was looking at your screening tool, the loss of life actually came up as yellow, which typically indicates like, hey, you might need to look into this a little bit deeper. I thought that was interesting because you know what? You do have insurance policies, but then as I dove into this a little bit deeper, I started to consider that there could be a potential issue there. Why? You're both bringing in over 6 figures, but you do still have quite a bit of some liabilities on your map, and you're both in your early 50s. If you're going to work for another 10 years, if one of you was to unexpectedly pass, I mean, you've got dependents that are counting on you. You're caring for your adult mother. You've got your child, right? So even before I would have this conversation with this client, I used the household index list to help me potentially uncover a household to dive into deeper, but you don't even have to use the household index list. If you just come into a household and you're like, I just want to see if there's a life insurance opportunity here, or I just want to run a retirement analysis, because you can, and then you can present those findings to them. Now, everything here on this map, the primary client and the spouse, and their ages and their incomes and their assets, that's what's being taken into consideration for Signals. And so looking at the signal being yellow, okay, that gives me permission that, yeah, I need to go run the actual numbers on this, and I need to determine if one of them was to unexpectedly pass, would you be okay? So this is where I go straight into target maps, and I come to click new target map. I'd run a loss of life. I'm just going to do it for one of them today for the sake of time. I'm going to do it for the primary client. and I'm going to click create. Again, I'm not going to take you through the math of a target map because we have separate training on that, okay? And there's a lot of you on today's call that have been using our platform for a long time. You know how target maps work. That is not to say that some of you on today's call should be expected to know how target maps work if you don't know how they work. All I'm going to suggest is that you come to our weekly signals target map training that we have. However, let's go over some quick overview, okay? Every target map is formatted the same no matter what type of target map you run in terms of format. You're always going to have a funding percentage followed by the funding circle around it and then a funding bar. So anytime you open up a target map, we're looking at that need, we're looking at that goal, and we're saying you're 36% of the way there. So tangible goals, things like retirement, education, buying the boat, taking the dream vacation, those are great, right? But we also have to run analysis on things that are not so fun to think about, things like loss of life, disability, long-term care. So right now, running this loss of life for Eddie, I can say, as of right now, we're 36% of the way there in terms of funding this need. Now, let's talk about the specifics. Tab number 1, we're saying, what are we solving for? What's the expense? So if he dies today, we're trying to solve for all these things. Tab number 2 is, what can I check on to be applied towards the funding of this goal? For a loss of life specifically, the only thing that gets checked on here are any insurance policies, life insurance policies tied to the person who's passing away. So that's why in this illustration, we only see his whole life policy and his group life policy. Now, everything in tab number 2 is fed from the asset map report, all the cash flow sources, all the assets, etc. So you got to come in here, you got to check on the things that would be applicable. And then we have to think, okay, what I like to do is I switch the expected net return on 0, always. Whenever I run a target map, no matter what, okay? Religiously, I do this. I switch it to 0. Why? Because when this is 0 and you're in tab number 1, you can see what the total value of all these expenses would cost. Okay, total value. Simple math. We're coming down here, taking this, growing it by 3% COLA for this time span, it equals this. Taking this value, growing it by 3% COLA, it goes from this time span, it equals this. We add them all up, it gives you this number. You could get a calculator out, it would literally do it verbatim, okay? But this is assuming that your money does nothing for you. And the fact of the matter is, like, we might have some insurance policies that would pay out, and maybe you would tell the spouse, like, we're gonna, invest that and average a 2% rate of return, okay? I can't tell you what to put there. Some people leave it at 0 when they're running loss of life, or, some of these analysis where they might be trying to sell insurance, for example. You have to determine what's correct, okay? But guess what? I don't need 1.9 million for this need if he dies today. As long as the money continues to do something for him, I only need 1.7 instead. Makes sense. You need less money up front today if your money continues to do something for you. So this expected net return on capital is not only used as the blended rate of return tied towards anything checked on in tab number 2, it is also used as the discount rate in the present value calculation to give us that present value equivalent of how much money we'd have to come up with today in order to fund this need. Tab number 3 summarizes it all. We need 1.7 million if you were to die today, funding all of the following expenses. Okay, so capital required, that's tab number 1. Over on the right, capital available, we've got the 2 current policies that you have, right? If we average a 2% rate of return on that money, so everything in tab number 2 that's been checked on shows here. So what does it mean? Well, we need 1.7, we have 570 of that covered, which means there's $1.2 million deficit here. Okay, that's our gap. How do we choose to fund that gap? That's up to you, the financial professional. But you know what I like to do in a loss of life? I come back here and I look at the income span, the income replacement years. I look at that span of time and I type the number in here, right? So if he dies today at 55, but he would have worked until 67, that's what, 12 years? Keep me honest. I haven't had coffee yet today, okay? So I'm going to put 12. If I click off to the side, if you put a duration of contributions here, the only thing it does is it helps you calculate and take this deficit and calculate a monthly amount. Because guess what? This is what I would say. I would say, listen, as of today, if you were to pass away and all of these expenses are reasonable, right? Because you want to ensure that your family is taken care of, you'd need to come up with we need about $1.7 million to cover this expense. Okay, if you were to die, to fund all these expenses. But based off of your current insurance, because that's all we're looking at in this particular illustration, only like a little, less than half of it's even covered by that. So what does that mean? Well, it means we have $1,002,000 deficit. So guess what? If you die today and we do nothing, your spouse is going to have to come up with $1.2 million. She's going to have to write me a check. I'm going to have to average a 2% rate of return on that money that she gives me. And if I can do that, then she can self-fund the rest of this. It'd be, this gap would be filled. Do you think she'd be able to do that? They're going to say no, right? Okay, so let's look at that 12 years. Like if you died today and you would have worked till 67, that's 12. So if we look at that 12-year span, this $1.2 million deficit also comes out to being about $9,300 a month. So either she'd have to come up with $1.2 million today if you die, or she'd have to get a second job or find a way to come up with $9,300 a month every month for that 12 years that you would have been working. Do you think she can do that? No. I guarantee you have insurance products, other vehicles and things that have premiums that are a heck of a lot lower than $9,300 a month, right? So this is where you can build in your recommendations. So I don't write insurance. Okay, I have to use that as a disclaimer because I'm not giving anyone advice on like what to put. You have to back into your recommendations. I have to say that. But one of the things I like to do is if I'm running a loss of life, I like to show their current scenario and then I'll clone it and I'll layer in recommendations. So that's what I'm going to do here today. If I click settings and I rename this and I call this loss of life, but this is with his current insurance, okay, I can go ahead and click update. And then once I've named it, and again, I've checked the math, I like the way this looks, you got to do your due diligence to do the same, okay? It is your responsibility to make sure that you understand the math and the target map and that the correct things are selected. Then you come up here and you can click clone. When you click clone, it creates a carbon copy of all the work that you just did. And now you can layer in your recommendations. So check this out. If you click into the copy version and you click into tab number 2, you'll notice under cash flow sources, under cash flow sources, there's a button where you can add custom cash flows. There's also an assets area where you can add custom assets, but insurance specifically, if you're trying to add in like a recommended policy, you don't add the recommended policy in the target map. Where you have to do it, because it's just system design, is you got to do it on their physical asset map report. So this is where I could right click my mouse. I could click create, click insurance. Okay, we'll just leave it at term because again, I don't write insurance, so I'm just going to go ahead and put this in here. And we'll call this, proposed new term. We'll put where it's going to be held at, and we'll call it like $1 million death benefit. Okay, and I'll go ahead and mark it on such. And I can go ahead and click create. And maybe that's going to cost him, anywhere from like $2,000 to $4,000 annually, like in premium or whatever it is, right? Again, like you'll know the specifics of it, but I like to add in the proposed policy. Then I can go back into the target map, click into the one that I cloned, and I can go into tab number 2 and I can layer it in. Scroll down under insurance, it will be there. It's not going to be auto selected because I added it after I already created the target map, but it does flow through and I can turn it on. And I can show the implications of what this could potentially do for them. And this is where I can come to the settings area and I can change the name because we don't want copy. So I could call it current insurance plus, we could call it 1 mil term proposed, whatever it is. Okay, give it a name. But look at this. When you go out to the highest level, look how clean and concise this is to be able to have that conversation. And this is where start to finish, you can say we were just doing our regular routine checks. Your household came up, we took a look at our screening tool. Our screening tool let us know that there could potentially be a little bit of an issue in terms of a loss of life scenario. Guess what? We went and ran the numbers. And if we're just looking at your current insurance, there in fact would be a problem, but here's together how we're going to fix it. So that's what I want to encourage you all to do. You can leverage tools like the household index list through filters and columns to look for potential opportunities. You can also just think of an upcoming client that you're going to be meeting with, and you can just take a look at their signals. Are any of their signals sticking out as being a potential problem? Like, for example, long-term disability is red, but guess what? Makes sense because only he has a long-term disability policy added. Now, because they both work in the school system, I might even want to ask her like, hey, do you have a long-term disability? And what about through work? Do they have short and long-term disability, group policies through work? Potentially. So sometimes the signals might be red or yellow because we're just simply missing information. But sometimes the signals are going to be red and yellow because there's actually a problem there. And guess what? Just because something's green does not actually mean 100% funded. So just because you see longevity is green does not mean you're not going to still go run a retirement analysis. Because even though Signals runs off of a predictive model on the back end, this is a color gradation scan, right? So what it's going to do is it's going to say, if it's green, it says, listen, there appears to be some funding that might be able to be used, but we don't know 100% if it's going to be okay, but there appears to be funding. I think the threshold on the back end is like if they hit above 60%, like it appears that there could be more than 60% funding available, but it doesn't tell you like the specific accounts, like, oh, we would take these 3 accounts and it would use that. So you still got to go run the math no matter what, because sometimes things like long-term care will trigger green because, well, they just have like a ton of non-retirement assets. So like the software is like, well, if they had to, they could like pick from that and they could self-fund it. Does that mean you'd recommend it? No. So just know that Signals really is an invitation to go into target maps. Target maps are where you quantify, are you on track? Yes or no. And don't forget that with target maps, you can select up to 3, but I'll just pick 2 for now, and you can put it into compare mode. This is one of our newest feature releases. We released this just under 6 months ago, and you can isolate the topics that you want to have the conversation about. You can layer in a new one. Okay. You can click into it and it'll open up the target map. We also added in the filters along the top. So you can see I have several different types of target maps added for this household. Sometimes when you're giving a presentation, you might want to isolate and say, you know what, only show the loss of life ones because those are the 2 that I want to focus on. So you can leverage those filters as well. Okay, last couple things before we wrap up for the day. In households themselves, okay, if you click into the members tab, this is a great place to see all the members across. You'll have the ability to see the relationship, some different things like date of birth, things like that as well. I always like to show the financials tab because it always shows the data collected date, meaning like that's the last time you clicked in and you updated that information. So like, for example, this says 8/7/2024. If you clicked into any of these instruments in the details tab, it'll have data collected. So watch, if I just switch this to say like, we'll call it like 1, and I click update, okay, not only is that going to update, but then it also switches that the data collected was today's date, okay, because I made an adjustment to that tile. So if you're kind of curious when the last time information potentially was updated in the application, this data collected column tends to be really popular. is under management. And what a lot of people forget to do is that by default, any instruments that get added, we mark that they're held away. You have to mark if they're under your management. So where you do that is on the asset map report, you can pay close attention that any of the tiles that have the location with the asterisk symbol means that you haven't marked that it's under your management. So that's a kind of a hidden gem from this view. You can just click into it and say it's under your management here. But some people prefer the listed view, and under financials, you can look at and if it was under your management, like let's say that this old 401k is under our management, I could just click on it and I could say under my management, click update, and then you'll notice that the box check mark gets added here too. Okay. Now we also have 3 interactive reports like the balance sheet. So if you're somebody who's wanting to facilitate a conversation, kind of show people their net worth, okay, you can auto select just one person at a time. You can click all, it'll turn everybody on. It'll list each person's name up at the top. But then if you scroll down, it gives you some totals of their individual kind of overall net worth and then total net worth for the whole household on the right hand side. So a lot of people really like this. This is the same thing as like the balance sheet report, except it's just in an interactive view so that if you were presenting digitally, you could pull this open and you can show it. Same thing with the policy summary. You can isolate to one person at a time, isolate to like one type of insurance at a time. You could turn every single member and entity on. You could turn on every single type of insurance. It's up to your discretion. And lastly, the beneficiary report. The beneficiary report, the interactive one, is a little bit different because we're only able to look at one person at a time. If you're someone that does estate planning or even likes to start estate planning conversations, or even just it's vital for you to know who the beneficiaries are, you should be coming to this report. Why? Because we can isolate one person at a time. Eddie, here are all of your unearned incomes, all of your assets, all of your liabilities. Okay. Anything listed under unassigned means that there's no beneficiary that's been selected. Okay. So what I could do is I can come in here and I can click into his pension and I can go into the details tab and I could say, okay, Laura, his spouse, is going to be the beneficiary of that. And I can click update. And then all of a sudden, that pension, 48,000, moves from unassigned. It will move over under Laura because she's going to be the beneficiary of that. Now, we recently released a brand new feature that I covered on our last training, but I'll show it again, which is our beneficiary visualization report. So instead of this kind of graph charted look, you can also switch to this view. It's the same exact information. You can only pick one person at a time, but now I can click on unassigned and it says, here are the things that are unassigned. And I can click into his social security and I can say, you know what, his wife, Laura, is going to be the beneficiary of his social security. So if I click that, all of a sudden, Social Security gets removed under unassigned earned income. Now, if I click this, you can see that his Social Security will go underneath Laura because she's the beneficiary of it, right? Same thing with the inheritance. Perhaps she's going to be the beneficiary of that, and we could go ahead and click update accordingly. Okay, really, really powerful. Now, all of these three interactive sections do flow through as physical reports. And so you can come in here and choose to include them as part of your deliverables. So we've got the balance sheet report, the policy summary, the beneficiary report as well. Now, one of the last things I want to show you is we also have the financial fire drills report. This is the report that actually inspired us to create Signals. And traditionally, years ago, this was the primary report that financial professionals were using to give them permission to go run target maps without clients asking them to. Because sometimes someone might come to you and say, I'm looking for some investment advice. Great. But if we see that there's a problem somewhere else, we need to be the first ones to bring it to their attention, right? So if you've never looked at the financial fire drills report, it can be found in every single household in their report section. Okay, you can include it as part of your deliverable. I'll just download it singularly on its own just so I can open it up so that you can see. But this is a report that you can include in your printed deliverable, and you could ask clients to fill this out, or you could print it out and have them fill it out in office if they're coming in for a meeting, or delegate to have somebody send this as like a mid-year check-in before like their annual review. And we say, listen, if these 6 life events take place, do you have a plan? Yes or no? If you have a plan, tell me what the plan is. If you don't have a plan, why do you not have a plan? And it could be because like you just don't feel like you need one. That's perfectly fine. Fill it out. Because guess what? Whether or not people have a plan in place or not, it gives you permission to go and run the numbers. Okay. And so, yes, for tangible goals, things that people are aiming for, of course, we're going to go run analysis on that. But sometimes people will tell you, well, I'm not worried about long-term care because I take good care of myself. Okay. Good to know. But are you aware that a long-term care event could completely disrupt your retirement and potentially make your family go broke because they're going to have to self-fund that? Are you aware of how expensive a long-term care event can be? Are you aware of how a long-term care event typically ends? Okay, not fun things to think about, but guess what? These things happen all the time. Unexpected loss. My own family went through that 2 years ago. My dad was hit by a drunk driver. Okay, I FaceTimed him in the morning. He was dead that night. It's crazy, but it's like, that's life, and things like this do happen, and it's terrible. Okay. And not having a plan in place really makes things even harder. And so you really do have a unique opportunity to put forth the effort to show people that not having a plan could be detrimental and that you at least want to get them set up for success. So I do believe that all of the features that I've showed you today, okay, so from the household index, mining it, using filters, using columns, leveraging signals in households, leveraging target maps, using the different interactive reports, using the financial fire drills reports. I believe that all of these tools and features, either isolated on their own or in conjunction or overlapping with one another, are really going to help you help your clients. And if you have questions about any of these things, you can always reach out to us. So before I take a look at the chat and answer any questions, I just want to check in with the group. And I'm going to ask you all to participate with me in a quick poll. So I just love to know if you love Asset Map. And if you do, would you ever be willing to leave us a quick or honest review? If the answer is yes, I'll post a link where you can leave us a quick review in the chat. I'll also send it in the follow-up email if you don't have time to do it now, but it does really mean a lot to myself and our team. And if the answer is, you know what, we love Asset Map, but not at this time, that is perfectly fine. And if you don't mind, in a moment, I'm going to ask you one more poll. And I know we're a couple minutes past the 45-minute mark, so thanks to those of you that are sticking around. But I think it's important for us to ask ourselves, are there areas about Asset Map that you'd like to learn more about? Oh, okay, I'll grab you the new link, no problem. Just give me 1 second and I can grab it for you. Somebody just let me know that the link in the chat is giving us some trouble. So let me just go ahead and open this up. Just wait for this to load. Here you go. This should be able to work for you. And if not, I was able to open it up. So I just sent you a new one. Hopefully that'll open for you there. The next poll I'm going to ask you really quickly is I just want to know, are there any areas that you'd like to learn more about Asset Map? You can put things like signals, target maps, how to introduce Asset Map, prospecting, marketing Asset Map. Take a second, fill it out, let me know. It's likely that we're going to have upcoming webinars that will speak to and or cover the things that you're going to be entering in this quick poll that I've posted. But also I can also follow up with you in an email and send you some resources, some additional trainings and things that you might want to learn more about. So if you don't mind just taking a second and typing in a couple things, I think that will be really great. Other than that, I'll leave the poll up for a second, but we're going to go ahead and move into our wrap up. So thank you so much for your time today. In terms of next steps, always keep a lookout for our next Accelerate Series webinar. If you love Asset Map and you are willing to leave us a review, please feel free to do that. And one of the last things that I'd like to talk to you about today is you may or may not be aware that once a quarter, we actually offer an Asset Map virtual boot camp. It's very popular amongst our users. We actually have some users that will attend several times throughout the year. Our next event is coming up in November. It'll be the 19th through 21st. And so if you'd like to register, I've got a discount code for you there in terms of your registration. And for those of you on our elite level subscription, bootcamp is included in your subscription. So you just need to email or reach out to us and we can give you the special code and we'll just verify your subscription access. And once we've done that, we can give you the special code to sign up. Other than that, that's all I have for us today. So thank you so much for your time. One last thing I'll ask is if you don't mind just letting me know what you thought about today's training. I'm just posting like a 2-question survey. Listen, I do take my job very seriously. I think many of you that have known me for years, you know that I like to make the training content enjoyable. We always have a ton to cover in a small amount of time. I do my best to not go too fast, but we do have to keep a relatively steady steady pace, excuse me. But your feedback is welcomed and please let me know there. All right, let me go ahead and take a look at some of these questions and just make sure that everything is tidied up. Yes. So for the question about when I added the proposed insurance to the asset map, it's going to show up in their asset map when reviewing assets, isn't it? Isn't there a way to show the proposed insurance without affecting their current asset map? So great question. As of today, there is no way to show the proposed new policy and allowing it to flow through to target maps unless you add it to their physical report. So we do have a feature in Asset Map called drafts where you can, draft different tiles and make adjustments to tiles, make deletions and or edits to tiles of like a copy of their Asset Map report to show how things would change. But ultimately, you're not able to layer drafts into target maps as of today. So that's why in today's illustration, I wanted to show insurance because sometimes people don't know how to show recommended policies, because the only way to get this like new proposed term to flow through into the target map is you have to add it here. But to your question, what you could do is you could click on the instrument itself and you could check this hide box and you could click hide. And what you could do is you could hide it from the map while you're having a conversation, and then you could layer it back in later on. Okay, so you could hide it, and then the only way to unhide it is to just click the search and select tool, and then anything hidden will be grayed and etched out. You just click on it and you click unhide, click yes, and it'll unhide it and it'll bring it back. And then you can go layer it back into a target map. Or I could click search and select tool and I could take it and I could hide it, and then I could remove it from the map. If it's hidden from the map, it's not going to flow through anywhere else in the application. It basically puts it to sleep. Okay. Is there a way to run a fire drill for midlife milestones, family planning, or a major home purchase? Absolutely. Yeah. So you can build that out into target maps. So you can just create it as like a custom target map. You can come in here and click new and click custom, and you could call it family planning. Maybe they're going to have to do IVF. Maybe they're going to have to do like surrogacy, or maybe that's like their preferred method, whatever the case is. But any type of target map where you're trying to show people like saving towards some type of a large investment and or purchase, typically we see that being built as custom target maps, and you can always reach out to our team and we can walk you through how to build one of those, and you can do that as well. If you're an enterprise client, it's likely that you have a lot of the features that we showed today. If there's just one or two that are missing, it just means it hasn't been either rolled out to your company yet at this time, or it might be something that we have to submit to home office to see if they would even approve, to be added into your membership level. So just something to consider there. Is there anything in the works? So there's a couple questions in here about some integrations. We'll probably take the integration questions offline just because they're a little slightly off topic of what we've talked about today, but very valid questions nonetheless. So feel free to chat that into our team and we'd be more than happy to help you. If I don't answer everyone's question, you can click the chat bubble here. When you open up the support center, the first option is the ability to chat into our team and we can take a look at it with you. Specifically for the question that's coming in regarding Salesforce and any type of integration there, as of right now, not a current capability, unless you're on one of our like larger enterprise clients. That might have been something that was like custom built, but again, we can check for you. You'll just need to live chat into our team and we can take a look at it. I think other than that, I answered everyone's questions, so I will go ahead and stop our recording for today.